The sound of shoes clicking against marble echoed faintly through the quiet hallways of Monroe and Kane's 37th floor. It was well past 2 in the morning, the city below dimmed to a gentle glow, the skyline of Chicago blurred behind the office's glass walls. Avery Monroe, CEO and founding partner of one of the top architectural firms in the country, wasn't supposed to be here. He'd come back only to retrieve a forgotten blueprint draft, something he needed before an early morning pitch. He didn't expect to find someone else, especially not a child, alone in his office. At first he thought he was hallucinating. A small figure, maybe 3.5 feet tall, was kneeling on the polished floor in front of the reception desk, scrubbing what appeared to be an invisible stain with a worn-out cloth. Her thin arms moved in slow, determined circles, her fingers red from the cold tile. Avery stopped at the edge of the hallway, frowning, the security lights casting a silver hue across the floor. "What the hell are you doing here?" he said louder than he meant to. His voice echoed off the sleek walls. The girl froze. Her back straightened, and slowly she turned to face him. Her eyes were large and calm, not startled, not fearful, just prepared. That struck him as strange. A child her age should have looked terrified being caught like this. Instead, she blinked once and said in a clear, small voice, "I'm cleaning, sir." Avery took a step forward. "Where's your mother?" "She's working." "At the hospital." "Night shift," she said, rising slightly on her knees. "Miss Hargrove said if I cleaned everything real good, I could sleep in the janitor's closet tonight." He stared at her, stunned. "What's your name, Nova Carter?" she said quickly. "I'm 8.5. His heart gave an involuntary twist. The way she said it, so measured, like it was rehearsed. She was small for her age, he could tell that immediately. Her sweatshirt was 2 sizes too big, her jeans frayed at the cuffs, and her sneakers looked like they'd been passed down twice over. Avery glanced around the office, suddenly aware of how pristine everything looked, how sterile, how polished, how grown up. This space wasn't meant for children. And yet here she was. "You shouldn't be here," he said more gently, crouching to her level. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible now. "But Miss Hargrove said it's good to learn early. She said kids like me need to understand how the world works." Avery clenched his jaw. "Kids like you?" Nova's eyes didn't waver. "She says people like me need to try harder, because we don't get second chances." That stopped him cold. He stared at her, trying to make sense of what she just said. There was no sarcasm, no anger in her voice, just quiet understanding. Like someone who had already accepted a truth far too heavy for her age. "Have you done this before?" he asked. She nodded. "Sometimes. When my mom can't find anyone to watch me. She works 2 shifts now." He stood up slowly, feeling a strange pressure in his chest. This was more than a one-time thing. This was routine. This was survival. He looked down at Nova, who was already turning back to her cloth. "Nova," he said softly, "put that down." She hesitated. "It's okay," he added. "You're not in trouble." Her fingers loosened the cloth, falling from her hand onto the marble with a soft slap. "If I don't finish," she said, her voice now edged with something closer to fear, "Miss Hargrove might get mad. And if she gets mad, my mom might lose her job." It hit him like a blow to the chest. This wasn't about discipline or chores. This was an 8-year-old child cleaning a corporate office in the middle of the night to keep her mother from being punished. Nova wasn't just being taught responsibility. She was being held hostage by someone else's sense of hierarchy. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Avery didn't know what to say, didn't know where to put the fury that was starting to rise in him. He'd built this company on order, on logic, on systems. But none of those systems had flagged this. None had told him that a little girl had been quietly working under his roof, unseen, unprotected. "I think," he said finally, his voice low, "and even you and I need to have a talk with Miss Hargrove." Nova's expression didn't change, but he saw it in the way her body tensed, the way her eyes followed him closely now, not with trust, but with caution, as if she'd heard that line before from someone who never followed through. And yet she didn't move when he reached for the office door. She just stood there, small and quiet, watching the man who, for the first time in his career, wasn't thinking about floor plans or revenue margins. He was thinking about justice. Nova didn't follow him right away. She lingered near the doorway, her eyes darting to the dark corridor behind them, like she expected her to emerge and snatch her back. Avery glanced over his shoulder and gently nodded. It's okay. Come on. You're with me now. That small assurance seemed to be enough. Nova stepped forward quiet as a shadow and followed him into his corner office. The room felt different to him now. Same sleek glass walls, same leather furniture, same view of a sleeping Chicago, but everything had shifted. A child had just altered the gravitational pull of his world. He poured a glass of water from the minibar and handed it to her. She cupped it with both hands like it was something sacred. So, Miss Hargrove, Avery said slowly, watching her. Tell me about her. Nova didn't look up. She says my mom should be grateful that it's lucky someone even gave me a job. Then more quietly, she says, I'll understand when I'm older. Avery sat down across from her. Do you think that's true? I think grown-ups say things like that when they don't want to feel bad. He almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're not wrong. There was a silence between them, but not an uncomfortable one. It was the kind that happens when two people from opposite ends of the universe finally recognize something human in each other. He leaned forward. Nova, your mom Camille, right? She nodded. She doesn't know you're here tonight, does she? Another pause, then a soft shake of the head. She thinks Miss Hargrove found someone else to take me for the night. But she said if I ever come back here again and get caught, she might lose her promotion. Avery's chest tightened. He felt the burn of shame. His company, his name, had become a threat to a mother just trying to hold her life together. I want you to know something, he said carefully. You're not in trouble, and your mom's not going to lose anything. I promise you that. Nova looked at him as if measuring the truth in his voice. People promise a lot, she said, but they don't always mean it. That one stung, not because it was unfair, but because it was true. Avery stood up. Come with me. I think it's time Miss Hargrove and I had a very clear conversation. Her eyes widened slightly. She's not gonna like that, he smiled grimly. I don't need her to like it. They walked together through the hushed hallway. The carpet softened their steps and the building seemed to hold its breath. When they reached the elevators, Avery pressed the button and turned to Nova. I want you to stand beside me when I talk to her, he said. Not behind me, beside me. That caught her off guard. She blinked, lips parting, but said nothing. The elevator doors slid open and they stepped in. As they descended to the operations level, Avery's thoughts spiraled not with panic, but with clarity. For 45 years, he'd operated by the rule that silence and efficiency kept a business running. But silence was what let this happen. Silence had allowed people like Linda Hargrove to decide what was appropriate, who belonged, and who could be quietly swept under the rug. As they reached the ground floor, the elevator let out a soft chime. Nova turned to him. Mr. Monroe. Yes, she looked him straight in the eye. Thank you for seeing me. Avery swallowed hard. He didn't know how to say what was building inside his chest, so he just nodded. The doors slid open. And just like that, the reckoning began. They didn't have to look far. Linda Hargrove was already in the building. Apparently, she'd come in early for a surprise inspection, a habit she prided herself on. Avery spotted her through the glass of the operations lounge, clipboard in hand, speaking in hushed tones to one of the night crew. Her posture was perfect, spine straight as a ruler, mouth pursed in that familiar expression of superiority she wore like perfume. Nova slowed when she saw her. Avery felt the shift in her body, shoulders tightening, steps, hesitating. He placed a steadying hand on her back. I've got this, he said. You're just here to see what the truth sounds like when someone finally says it out loud. He opened the door without knocking. Linda turned, and for a split second her expression flickered. Surprise, then irritation, then something close to fear, but she covered it quickly. Mr. Monroe. I wasn't expecting you this early. I can see that, he said coolly. We need to talk. Her eyes slid past him to Nova, who stood just behind Chin, slightly lifted eyes steady. I assume this is about last night, Linda said, crossing her arms. There was a minor misunderstanding. Miss Carter was working, Avery cut in. At 2 a.m, in my office? Alone. Linda's jaw tightened. Her mother asked me to keep her there. It was unconventional, yes, but it was done with the best intentions. Camille needed help, and frankly, I thought it was a chance to teach responsibility. Responsibility, his voice dropped sharp as glass. To an 8-year-old, she's mature for her age. And let's be honest, Mr. Monroe, some children, especially those from certain backgrounds, benefit from learning structure early. There it was. He felt the slow burn rise in his chest. Linda, do you have children? She blinked. No. My career required full commitment. Right, he said. And yet you feel qualified to decide what kind of childhood someone else's daughter should have. I was trying to help, she insisted, raising her voice slightly. No, you were trying to control, Avery said. And you did it under my name and my company. Linda stepped forward. With all due respect, sir, people like the Carters need guidance. They need structure. The world has a hierarchy. You of all people should understand that. Avery stared at her, stunned by how easily the words came out of her mouth. You really believe that, don't you? That some people are just meant to serve? She didn't answer, and she didn't need to. Behind him, Nova shifted slightly, her small hand brushing against the seam of her jeans. Avery turned to her. You okay? He asked gently. She nodded but didn't speak. Then he looked back at Linda. Where is Camille Carter right now? At St. John's. ER shift. Why? Because I'll be speaking to her directly. And after that, I'll be launching a full internal review of every hiring, firing, and promotion you've overseen in this company. Linda's eyes widened. Mr. Monroe, with all due respect, this is an overreaction. A personal matter. It stopped being personal when a child was mopping my floors to protect her mother's job. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. And if I find that this wasn't an isolated incident, if I find even one pattern, Linda, I will burn your whole kingdom down. Linda took a step back, genuinely rattled now. Sir, I've been loyal to this firm for years. Avery didn't blink. And you may have built something efficient, but efficiency built on fear and silence isn't leadership. It's rot. He turned to Nova. Come on. As they left the room, Nova walked a little taller, and Avery felt something unfamiliar rise in him. Not guilt, not even anger anymore. Something closer to conviction, because he knew now this wasn't just about Nova. It was about every face he'd walked past without seeing, every resume filtered out, every assumption left unchecked, and he wasn't going to be silent anymore. The ride back up felt heavier than the one before. Nova stood beside Avery in the elevator, not saying much, but the difference was in her posture. She wasn't hugging the wall anymore. She stood near the center, her hands clasped in front of her, gaze steady ahead. Avery glanced down at her. You did good. She didn't smile, but she gave a small nod. She talks like she owns everything. She thought she did, he said, but she's wrong. By the time they returned to his office, dawn was starting to color the sky in soft streaks of orange and blue. Avery offered Nova the couch and a blanket, and for the first time that night, she allowed herself to sit down like a kid. Within minutes, she was asleep, curled up in the corner, breathing soft, and even her small fingers still clenched lightly, as if holding on to something invisible. He didn't wake her. He just sat down at his desk, pulled out a legal pad, and began writing. Calls were made later that morning. Not to PR, not to marketing. Avery called Jason Reddick, an employment attorney he'd worked with once during a merger. But this time, it wasn't about protecting the company. It was about exposing it. I need a full audit, Avery said. Every hiring decision, every performance review, every promotion or termination, especially under Linda Hargrove. Jason paused. Avery, that kind of review will rip the floorboards out from under you. This is serious. I know. But if Nova hadn't scrubbed those floors last night, I never would have seen how deep it runs. I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm asking you to help me clean it out for real. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. I'll get my team, Jason said. We start tonight. Later that day, Avery walked into the hospital. He'd never been there before, not to the emergency wing anyway, and the place was buzzing with controlled chaos. Nurses moving fast intercoms, crackling, patients moaning quietly from behind curtains. He spotted her right away, Camille Carter. Mid-30s, high-bun eyes, tired but alert. She was charting something when he approached. She looked up and froze. Mr. Monroe, she said cautiously. If this is about last night, please, I didn't know. I told Linda not to. She said she lied, Avery said softly. Camille blinked, caught between relief and fear. She told me if Nova showed up again, I'd lose my chance at the advancement program, she said, her voice breaking slightly. And that you'd support her. I didn't even know Nova was here, Avery replied. Until I found her, alone, cleaning. Camille turned her face away for a moment. There's no one to watch her when I work nights. The community center closes early, and I can't afford a sitter. I tried everything. I believe you, he said. She looked back at him surprised. No challenge, no accusation, just belief. I'm launching an investigation, he continued, and I want to make you a promise. 1, your job is safe. 2, you're going into that nursing advancement program with a full scholarship, funded by us. And 3, you're going to help me fix this place. Camille's eyes filled instantly. Why, she asked, voice cracking. Why would you do that? He thought for a second. Because your daughter reminded me what justice is supposed to feel like. Camille covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hold back the sob that broke anyway. That night, while Nova slept soundly in a real bed in his guest room, Avery and Jason worked through company files like surgeons cutting through infected tissue. Every spreadsheet, every hiring funnel, every line of code in the system's filters examined under a new light. What they began uncovering was worse than expected. Linda wasn't just a supervisor with a superiority complex. She had shaped entire HR protocols, coded language, unwritten cultural fit metrics, quietly shifting Black and brown applicants into janitorial and security roles regardless of qualifications. And no one had questioned it. Not once. Not even Avery. Until now. As Avery stared out the window into the night, he thought of Nova's words. People like me have to work twice as hard just to be seen. That was over. Now he was going to make sure they didn't just get seen, they got hired, promoted, and protected. Because justice, he realized, wasn't just about removing what's wrong, it was about building something right in its place. 3 days passed and Avery barely slept. What started as a late-night discovery had become an unrelenting fire inside him, one that burned through every comforting lie he'd built his empire on. For the first time in his career, he wasn't reviewing quarterly reports or expansion forecasts. He was reviewing lives. And the numbers didn't lie. The more Jason and his team uncovered, the clearer the pattern became. Over a span of 10 years, more than 200 employees had been hired under Linda's supervision. Only a sliver less than 10% were Black. And nearly all of them had been placed in cleaning, maintenance, or entry-level security positions, regardless of qualifications. Avery stared at the data one evening, the bar graphs glowing on the projector in his office. He felt sick. Jason pointed at one of the emails. This one here, Linda sent it to HR about a candidate named Williams. Master's degree, fluent in 3 languages. The note says strong resume, but not a culture fit. Recommend redirecting to facilities role. Avery rubbed his jaw. That's not a redirect. That's a burial. Jason nodded grimly. And there are dozens more, all the same coded language. Better suited elsewhere. Doesn't reflect the client-facing dynamic we want. He didn't need a translator to understand what those phrases really meant. That Friday, Avery called a special executive board meeting. Attendance was mandatory. At 9 a.m. sharp, the conference room on the top floor filled with 12 of the highest-ranking decision-makers in the firm. They came expecting a financial update or perhaps news of a merger. Instead, they found a silent projector screen, a stack of confidential reports at every seat, and Jason Reddick standing beside it. Linda Hargrove entered last, calm and composed as always, her hair pinned neatly, her blouse starched and spotless. She offered Avery a tight smile and took her seat, unaware that her world was about to come apart. Good morning, Avery, began his voice, even but cold. Today we won't be discussing growth strategy. Today we're going to talk about something more important: how we became complicit in a culture of exclusion. The room stilled. Jason stepped forward, flipping to the first slide, a graph. Bright, brutal, undeniable. It showed hiring distribution by race across departments, cleaning and security. Nearly 80% Black or brown. Executive roles, 95% white. Murmurs rose. Someone shifted in their chair. Linda's face paled slightly. Is that accurate? Asked one board member. Jason replied, every number, every file, verified. Next slide, email excerpts, one after another, all signed by Linda, all dripping with euphemisms for gatekeeping. And then the audio. Jason played a recording of a phone call made from Linda's work line, her voice unmistakable. "We need someone the clients feel comfortable with. You know what I mean?" Linda stood up. "This is absurd. This is being taken out of context." Avery didn't move. "Sit down." She froze. Then came the final blow, a recording between Linda and Camille Carter, threatening to block her from the advanced nursing program if Nova showed up at the office again. "That's blackmail," someone whispered. "No," Avery said. "That's exploitation of a mother and a child." Linda's composure cracked. "I've served this company for years. I built systems that worked, systems that made us efficient, respected." "Efficient for who?" Avery asked quietly. "Respected by whom?" She looked around the room searching for support. There was none. He stood. "Linda Hargrove, you have two choices. You can resign today immediately with a statement citing philosophical differences, or you can be terminated for cause, including grounds for discrimination, blackmail, and endangering a minor. And yes, we will pursue legal recourse." Silence. Tears welled in her eyes, not from regret, but from humiliation. "You're destroying me over one child." Avery shook his head. "No. You did that to yourself. And it wasn't just one child. It was dozens of futures you buried in mop closets and service hallways." Linda stormed out, her heels clicking down the corridor like a gavel. The board sat in stunned silence. Avery let them sit with it, because this wasn't the end. It was just the reckoning. By Monday morning, the fallout was national news. The story broke across 3 major outlets before noon. Chicago CEO fires executive after discovering child labor and discriminatory hiring practices. Monroe and Kane was trending for all the wrong reasons, but Avery didn't flinch. For the first time in his life, he wasn't worried about public perception. He was focused on something else entirely, making sure this never happened again. In the weeks that followed, change came fast and loud. Linda's resignation was only the first domino. A full restructuring of the HR department was launched, and with Avery's backing, Camille Carter, yes, Nova's mother, was named the new director of human resources. Her first move, dismantling every internal filter that had once excluded qualified candidates based on culture fit and replacing them with blind merit-based review protocols. Some questioned the decision. Avery didn't entertain their doubts. He'd seen firsthand what Camille carried: the grit, the clarity, the empathy sharpened by surviving a system that never gave her a break. She didn't need an MBA. She had lived experience. And more importantly, she had vision. 6 months passed. That morning, Avery stood by his office window again, coffee in hand. Only now the view wasn't just steel and glass and commerce. Across the street, in the private school playground, Nova was running with her classmates. Her laugh reached him even through the glass light and full unburdened. She wasn't cleaning floors anymore. She was 10 now and brilliant and curious in all the best ways. Every week she stopped by the office after school to visit her mom and check in on the grown-ups, as she liked to say. Her favorite thing was sitting in on hiring panels, doodling quietly while listening to conversations about diversity, leadership, and impact. "Monorasibo, Avery," she said one afternoon, popping into his office unannounced. "Our teacher asked what we want to be when we grow up." He looked up smiling. "And what did you say?" "I said I want to build something. Like you, but for kids like me. So they don't have to clean at night just to be safe." He swallowed the sudden emotion rising in his throat. "You'll build something better than I ever did, Nova." She nodded as if she already knew. Just then, Camille appeared at the door, shaking her head with a smile. "Sorry, she slipped away from my office again." "It's fine," Avery said. "She owns the place." That evening, Forbes published a full spread, How Monroe and Kane Became the National Blueprint for Inclusive Corporate Reform. The firm had hired 42 new employees in 6 months, over 70% from underrepresented backgrounds, placed across departments including leadership and development roles. It wasn't charity, it was long overdue access. And the company didn't just survive, it thrived. Morale was up. Innovation was surging. Clients responded to the transparency and ethics like never before. Across the city, Linda Hargrove walked out of her third failed interview. Word had spread. Every office she walked into now measured her, not by her crisp resume, but by the legacy of damage she'd left behind. The coded language she once used so freely was now being used against her, not the right culture fit. She finally understood what that meant. Meanwhile, back at Monroe and Kane, Nova stood beside her mother in the newly renamed Carter Monroe Fellowship Hall, a space created for mentorship, youth training, and community outreach. This was supposed to be the storage floor, Nova said wide-eyed. Camille laughed. Now it's a place where no kid will ever have to sleep on the floor again. Avery watched from the doorway, hand in his pocket, heart full. He didn't interrupt, just stood quietly as mother and daughter walked through the room they had inspired, rewriting not just company policy, but its very purpose. Because in the end, it was never about cleaning up messes. It was about building something better. And that's exactly what they were doing. 2 years later, the building felt different. It wasn't just the rebranded name on the front entrance or the diversity banners in the lobby. It was in the way people greeted each other in the hallways, in the openness of team meetings, in the kinds of voices that now filled the conference rooms. For Avery, the change wasn't just structural, it was personal. And nothing reminded him of that more than mornings like this. He sat at his desk watching through the window as Nova, now almost 11, walked confidently across the courtyard in her school uniform, her backpack swinging as she laughed with two other girls. She'd grown taller, but her walk still had that same quiet determination. Only now it wasn't weighed down by fear. It was lifted by possibility. Camille knocked gently before entering. "You've got the quarterly strategy review in 20, she said, holding a folder. "Right," he replied, still half watching Nova. "But this is the only meeting I care about right now." Camille followed his gaze, then smiled. "First day at her new school. The scholarship foundation you started made it happen." "She made it happen," Avery said. "We just gave her the runway." Camille sat across from him, her presence as grounded and steady as ever. There were still long days, tough calls, and uphill climbs. But every now and then, like today, they both allowed themselves to pause and take in how far they'd come. "She asked me last night," Camille said, "if Linda ever thinks about what she did." Avery raised an eyebrow. "What did you tell her?" "I told her it's not our job to worry about people who refuse to grow. It's our job to make sure no one else gets left behind just because of where they started." He nodded. "She's got a good teacher." There was a knock at the door, and then Nova peeked her head in. "Mom, Mr. Avery." "Can I come in?" Always, Avery said, motioning her over. She skipped in and handed him a drawing-colored pencils on thick white paper. It was a tall building with a big tree growing up the middle, its branches stretching through every floor. "It's my future company," she said proudly. "It's going to be a place where kids can come after school to learn and invent and eat snacks and feel safe. And the tree, that's to remind people we grow up not just through." Avery studied the drawing carefully, then looked at her. "You know, I think you're already growing something big." Nova grinned, then leaned in closer. "Mr. Avery, thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me that night, for seeing a kid." He didn't speak for a moment, just reached out and gently tucked one of her curls behind her ear. "You were never invisible, Nova. I just wasn't looking. But I'll never stop now." She nodded satisfied and gave him a quick hug before darting back out. After she left, Camille said quietly, "She still keeps that little blanket from your office couch. Says it was the first time she ever felt safe somewhere unexpected." Avery closed his eyes for a second, then opened them with renewed clarity. Success used to mean expansion numbers, accolades. Now it meant that little girl could draw a building with a tree in the middle and believe without doubt that she belonged in it. And somewhere in a quieter part of the city, Linda Hargrove was wiping down a counter wearing the same uniform she once used as a badge of status over others. She'd applied for dozens of positions since leaving Monroe and Kane, but her name was no longer associated with efficiency. It was synonymous with exclusion. At her last interview, someone had said, "We're looking for someone who better fits our values." And now she knew exactly what that meant. Back in his office, Avery reached for a fresh sheet of paper. There were more policies to write, more opportunities to create. Because just as he'd learned wasn't a moment, it was a practice. And as long as he was in this chair, that practice would never stop. If this story moved you even just a little, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching and for believing, like we do, that real change always starts with one brave choice.